be held over for possible inclusion. We now move to House File 1605. Representative Cleveland, if you'd like to come forward and present your address.
Anybody have a problem, I switched chairs so that we have other people that are going to be testifying, and I think he's able to say that chair. Sure.
Whatever you'd like to do, Representative.
I know, I'm kind of bizarre. I appreciate your patience, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and I will move House File 1605 for possible inclusion, and you can proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Tonight I'm asking for your consideration for House File 1605. This bill establishes a redistricting advisory commission to submit recommended legislative and congressional redistricting plans for approval by the legislature following the census. The work of this commission is advisory only. The commission will consist of 12 members from the public and 5 retired judges. The bill also establishes a series of principles that must be used in drawing the district boundaries. The Minnesota Constitution requires that the legislature adopt new congressional and legislative districts following each census. The next decennial census will occur in 2020. Redistricting plans are expected to be adopted by the legislature no later than February 22nd.
Thank you, Representative Cleaborn. And I know we have a lot of amendments that we'll need to get through, but I think first we'll start with your testifiers. So I believe that Carl Michael Bunday is up first. And just a reminder, 2 minutes is what we're trying to keep to. So if you could be brief, we would all appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Carl Bunday. I live in Minnetonka. Over the years, I've lived in more places in Minnesota than I can now remember. A variety of different parts of Minneapolis and far out suburbs, inward suburbs. I have also had involvement in Minnesota electoral politics with a number of party affiliations. I've been a precinct chair for both of the larger Minnesota major parties, and I have voted on Minnesota ballots for candidates of 7 different parties over the years. So I'm not here to grind an axe for members or organizations of any political party in Minnesota. I'm here thinking as a Minnesotan who's been many places that it's helpful for us, all of us in the state, to have a system that we can all trust. I support House File 1605 because the principles involved in the setting the district plans by the commission, I think prioritize the most important principles and are also principles that can be applied fairly in the case that the different principles don't produce the same answer for a given district line. I had the privilege as a judicial clerk for the Minnesota Supreme Court in 1990 to be advising judges of the court in the year when the court had to decide at the last minute who was the Republican candidate for governor in that year. And as you can see, the issued opinion of the court was an opinion that was issued with dissents. It was not an easy issue for the court to decide. So I look at the language of House File 1605, and I'm very glad to see that there's a clarity and a structure and a priority that first of all serves as a useful checklist to the members of the commission as they do their work. And also, if God forbid, somebody wants to sue on some aspect of the new redistricting plan, it's clear what principles reflect the legislature's intent for deciding how the district line should be drawn. I think the principles are fair, they're correct, they're easy to implement in the structure of the bill, and that's why I support House File 1605.
Thank you, Mr. Bundy. I hope that you can stay around should any of the members have questions for you. Great. Next up, we have Kathleen Simmons. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Kathleen Simons.
I'm sorry, Simons.
No problem. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kathleen Simons, and I'm here in support of House Bill 1605. I'm here because in our elections, every voice should be heard and every vote should be counted equally. And this bill is the best bill to make this happen. First, it sets up an advisory committee with not only 5 retired judges, but also 12 members of the public carefully selected to represent a diverse cross-section of our people here in Minnesota. Secondly, 1605 is the best bill because of the redistricting principles it has selected, and specifically which principles it has chosen, how it has defined them, and the order of priority in which it's assigned them. Now, this list of redistricting principles may look the same if you put those two bills next to each other, but they are not at all the same in their impact on district lines. For example, the core of higher districts principle in the other bill, 1018, which says preserve the cores of higher districts, actually ends up protecting incumbents and the status quo, including gerrymandered districts, where the current districts are gerrymandered. Another example, minority representation. It's listed as principle in both bills, but there's a difference. Our bill, 1605, stipulates that racial, ethnic, and language minorities, quote, must have an opportunity to substantially influence the outcome of an election, end quote. The other bill, though, even though it places minority representation right there, very near the top, in actuality only ensures that minorities have a realistic opportunity to elect candidates of their choice under 2 conditions. If they have a sufficient population, and if, quotes, it can be done in compliance with the other principles. Thus, in reality, minority representation in the other bill looks like it's a high priority, but in effect it is subservient to the other principles and thus has a lower priority. So one last reason for the 1605 being the best bill is as it explicitly disqualifies members of the public who might have a conflict of interest on the commission, such as people related to or working with members of the legislature, Congress, or other elected officials. The other bill does not have disqualifiers. It only states that the panel members must be retired judges. So, when we change our redistricting process, let's get the best process we can, the one that's most likely to get every voice heard and every vote counted equally.
Thank you, Ms. Simons.
Thank you.
I hope that you can stick around should we have questions as well.
Thank you.
Next we have Paul Bach. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Bach. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members, and representatives. My name is Paul Bach. I'm here to provide testimony in support of House File 1605. In our most recent election, we saw a lot of different tactics for voter suppressions. Luckily, in Minnesota, we don't have such blatant voter suppression, but we do have a very insidious. Gerrymandering has been used by both parties. It contradicts our democratic principles, allowing incumbents to pick their voters rather than voters to pick their representatives. It dilutes and perverts the will of the people. While I was door knocking earlier before the midterms, over and over the complaint I heard was that people felt that their legislators did not need to listen to them. Their individual votes or voices didn't matter. This bill will help change that and restore public trust. A very powerful and insightful aspect of this bill is the redistricting principles. The most important of these, I feel, is that no plan can be drawn to purposely favor or disfavor a party or candidate, and that residences of incumbents will not be taken into consideration at any time. If the resident of an incumbent is used, or the prior district shape is just reused, by definition, the newly drawn lines will still favor the status quo and give preference to the incumbent, rather than reflecting the current community. Incumbents should have no advantage over their challengers other than their record of work. I say let the best candidate win. I also feel the commission will be more obviously impartial with the inclusion of everyday Minnesotans. The demographics of retired judges yes, are overwhelmingly straight, white, wealthy male. This is not reflective of Minnesota today. Inclusion of citizens can help counterbalance this lack of diversity, providing greater transparency and greater acceptance of the recommendations. Finally, not only is gerrymandering un-American, it is costly. There were 7 lawsuits related to the 2010 census, not counting appeals. If you combine this with the amount of time wasted by the legislators drawing lines, getting vetoed, drawing lines, getting vetoed, we waste millions of dollars that could be used to help Minnesota in other ways. I urge you to support House File 1605. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Bachman. I hope that you can stick around as well. Next, we have Sarah, and I might butcher it.
Cooper, yeah.
Cooper. Please come forward, state your name for the record, and proceed with your testimony. And we won't start your time until you get
So my name is Sarah Cooper. I'm a resident of Minneapolis. Thank you to the committee and to the chair for allowing me this time. I am here to speak on behalf of House File 1605, and also on behalf of the coalition behind me, who have worked hard on coming up with principles that we feel will result in a fair and equal drawing of districts for all citizens of Minnesota. I support the bill because we believe that it is in fact the best bill representing the needs of the voters, and that the key to these is that the inclusion of the public members as part of the committee, and with the drawing of the neutral maps. So allowing the maps to be drawn without consideration of the past allows for a broad understanding of the current electorate and not weighing on past history. So we believe that that will allow the citizens to be confident that the process is open and transparent, and that the maps have been drawn in a fair and equal manner that will not favor one district over another, one voter over another.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper, and if you could stick around as well. Are there, are there any other members of the public that would like to testify? And we will shorten you down to 1 minute, because I saw a few hands come up, and you're all part of the coalition. It's already had 3 people speak. So I'll let 4 people come up, and you get 1 minute each. Please say your name for the record and proceed with your testimony, and I will cut you off at 1 minute.
My name is Stephen Smith. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, and Representative Cleveland for the opportunity to testify today in support of HF 1605. I am an emergency physician. Over the years, we in medicine have learned to practice patient-centered care. It is time for the legislature to adopt voter-centered redistricting. Just as good medicine should not be putting the doctor's interests first, or even consider their interests at all, redistricting should not put parties or incumbents first. We do this for the voters. Incumbents should not be favored. This is best done by a redistricting advisory commission. It is true that the legislature has a constitutional mandate to draw districts. The redistricting commission does not change this. In this bill, the legislature must approve anything the commission produces. For many years, the legislature has not fulfilled its constitutional mandate. It has gerrymandered, requiring the Supreme Court to redraw the maps. Let's fix this once and for all. Put voters first, do it right, do it openly and transparently, and so that the court intervention is not required. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next testifier. Please state your name for the record and proceed, and you have 1 minute.
Natalie Griffith, thank you for hearing me tonight. I'm concerned with how Minnesota currently establishes our election districts. In our current process, elected politicians draw the new district maps. In other words, the current process relies on incumbents to establish election districts. Our voters really have no visibility or input to mapping processes and principles, so we have, or can have, little confidence in the resulting districts being truly representative. Election districts are determinative for legislation on absolutely every single aspect of our lives. No other legislative responsibility has as much potential as redistricting to have such overarching impact on the life of every voter. Nevertheless, the last 2 efforts have both failed to pass legislative or gubernatorial approval, and in both instances, the Minnesota Supreme Court wound up appointing a panel to finalize the new district maps. And certainly we don't want to go through that process again. It's time-consuming and expensive.
And that's going to have to be final word. You remember this up. I'm I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
hearing.
Next person, please step forward, state your name for the record, and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Cheryl Atkinson. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Minnesotans want a redistricting legislation this year. I think 1605 will give them what they want because it addresses the critical details of legislation. Not only does it specify a credible process for unbiased selection of bipartisan advisory commission of retired judges and commissioners, more importantly, it lays out the principles upon which redistricting is to be accomplished. These principles are spelled out, anyone can read them, they are mandatory for the commissioners to follow. The principles include following federal law regarding voting rights, requiring the interests of voters and communities be put ahead of those of party and power, and specifically prohibiting the drawing of districts to purposely favor or disfavor an incumbent. Since abiding by many principles simultaneously is often difficult, these principles are ranked by priority. The framework that's outlined will make difficult decisions possible, defensible, transparent, and less vulnerable.
Ms. Atkins, I need you to wrap up, your minute is up, thank you. Okay, one more.
Parties.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony, and again, you have 1 minute.
I will be very quick. My name is Carolyn McLean, and I feel like I got called down for the Price is Right, so thank you. I am very excited to be here. It's my first time ever testifying, so this is democracy to me, so thank you. And I will say just briefly that I believe a bipartisan commission in 1605 would draw district maps that truly represent the people of Minnesota, that would not be skewed towards one political party, and I endorse 1605.
Thank you. That will conclude our public testimony. We have a series of amendments, and I would like to move through them one at a time. So if I can ask, who will be offering the A1 amendment?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think we had some general questions about the bill as it sits now. Would you like to do that now or after amendments?
Representative Nash, I think I'd like to go through the amendments and see what gets added or not added, and then go into a conversation about that.
Fair enough. There was no stumper answer, by the way.
No, I So the A1 amendments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'll take the A1 amendment.
Representative Driscoll, please tell us what the A1 amendment is.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The A1 amendment will allow the caucus leaders to select the members of the public. We think that that's a good, from the list of names that have been submitted, I think that's a good cross-section between the legislative mandate and having a commission that the legislative leaders stay a little bit closer, as does the legislature. So I encourage support of the A1 amendment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Driscoll. Representative Cleveland, to the A1 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative O'Driscoll. I would encourage a no vote for the A1 amendment. It will take the commission from 12 members, or 17 members, down to the 9 members, and it would significantly lessen the voices that would be heard. So I would urge a no vote on this amendment.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Cleveland. We have the A1 amendment before us. All those in favor say aye.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
there are 4 leaders, and I just want to kind of processing what Representative Cleveland had said. There are 4 leaders, there are 3 members from each caucus, that'd be 12, and I don't know how that brings it down to 9.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it said 3 members. I did the math wrong, and that I apologize.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to have clarification that all it does is just takes the size of the committee and just lets the caucus leaders equally between the House and the Senate pick the members from the list of submissions.
So, thank you, Representative Driscoll. If I could just ask you a question, which I know is a bit unusual. So really what it does is it takes the current process outlining this bill, which is ministered through the Secretary of State's office, and we put that in hands of the 4 leaders of the chambers, the majority and the larger minority in each of the chambers. Is that correct?
Correct. What would happen with the list would go to the Secretary of State's office of individuals who are interested. Those industry candidates be forwarded to the 4 major caucuses. They would review, make their selections, and then notify, and those would be the members of the panel. But I say it's kind of a cross between full legislative participation and what we have right now.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, I think that would just, possibly continue on a partisan divide. If each member has the same number of votes and they're each choosing, it's quite possible then that we would have a very strong partisan divide. You would have 4 major, 4 minor coming from the House. You would have 4 major, 4 minor coming from the Senate, if that's my understanding. Is that what you're saying?
Representative Cleveland, I think in the end it would be 3 minor, 3 major in each party in each chamber, which would give us 12, and that would remove the process by which I believe this bill outlines some individuals outside of the 2 major parties in the system being included.
And Mr. Chair, my final, I'm sorry.
We'll go to you, Representative
Thank you,
Driscoll.
Mr. Chair. I modeled this amendment after something that I did with the school trust lands, where we took the 4 caucuses, each had equal representation, so you weren't waiting with a majority and minority vote on there. It was equal numbers at the table from the chambers to be able to, for lack of a better term, duke it out and get the right answer.
Okay, thank you, Representative Driscoll. Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Cleveland, with regard to this amendment, did anybody come to talk to you ahead of time to see, ways that you could, alter the bill based on their opinions?
Representative
With,
Cleveland.
any members, I'm sorry. I'm sure a lot of people came to talk to you.
Mr. Chair, Representative Halverson, no member of the Minnesota House of Representatives spoke to me about this bill or this amendment prior to my receiving this amendment.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Halverson.
Thank you, and thank you for that, Representative Cleburne. I see that there are over 20 amendments, perhaps 25 amendments to this particular bill. And I think that the process of working together for a good product, having a bipartisan product is incredibly important. You know, we have members of the public who are here to be part of this process as well. I think that it is really good form to get in touch with the author and say, I've got some ideas about your bill, can we talk? And would really encourage members to do that, because I think that we want to work toward a process that works for the people of Minnesota. The integrity of our elections are really, really important. And if and there's a lot of amendments, there's a lot of ideas that are being put out here, and I think that we could find ways to work in a bipartisan way to make sure that you have an understanding of where folks are coming from, and can we can use the amendment process to look where we have some common ground and build it stronger. So I just wanted to put that out there, because we have so many ideas coming at us, and you know, with the public here, it would maybe be helpful for folks to recognize that we can do bipartisan work and bring ideas to one another and work together to come up with these amendments.
Thank you, Representative Halverson, and I do intend to get through all these. So I think if we can keep our comments internal to each amendment very, very brief, I do intend to move to a vote on this amendment within the next couple minutes. Well, less than a minute, so, Representative.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the comment that was just made, I would say that's a lot of what the committee process is for. We come here, we talk about these ideas, we possibly get them into the bill, maybe they don't make it into the bill. And the public is here to watch and participate, and I think that this is a perfectly fine methodology to go down. And you know, given the fact that folks are always busy and sometimes difficult to get on people's calendars, whether they was attempted or not, this is the committee process. And you know, in the years that I've been here, we will often slog things out in committee. And whether we were in the majority or now you're in the majority, I've seen it both times. So just thought that would be a salient point to bring up.
Thank you, Representative Nash, and for members of the public. When you hear the notion that making law is like making sausage, you're about to see that. So I would like to take a vote on the A1 amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
The amendment fails. Now we move on to the 19-0094 amendment.
Mr. Chair, that's mine as well.
Okay, proceed, Representative Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what this does is it says that with the 10-year prohibition, it just makes it a lifetime prohibition for partisan activity as it relates to this section of the bill.
Okay, thank you, Representative Driscoll. Representative Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Driscoll. I believe that 10 years is sufficient. People's lives change, lives are fluid, people have different experiences, and while a 10-year limitation might be sufficient to allow you to even rethink your thoughts about beliefs that you've had before, a lifetime, you said a lifetime? That's not what I read in the,
Yeah, what it means.
yeah. So I would encourage a no vote on this. I think 10 years is sufficient.
Thank you, Representative Cleveland, and I'll make a comment. I think we recently had a member in the House that over a 10-year span went from being a Republican to being an independent to being a Democrat. So I would agree with you that people change over a 10-year period, and I think we should allow that opportunity. Any comments?
We'll welcome you.
That was not an offer I was expecting. Thank you, Representative. I would like to move forward on the vote for A19-0094. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
The amendment is not adopted. Amendment A19-0095.
Mr. Chair, that's myself.
Okay, please proceed.
I would offer the 0095. This is an amendment that would maybe take it to a more granular level and say if you've been an active participant at, say, a precinct or a caucus or things like that, which is hyper-partisan, I think we could all agree on that, that you should be removed from the list of potential candidates, and I would urge this adoption.
Representative Cleveland to the 0095 amendment.
Mr. Chair and Representative Nash, I actually appreciate the comments that are coming from the Republican side of the table. When I first read the amendment, I had to stop and think about the very thing you said. Who attends conventions? Who attends caucus night? But I have to move past that and say no, because I want more people to attend caucus. I want more people to attend conventions. I don't want them to be so hyper party driven. I want just ordinary people to attend. And for that reason alone, I would say to you, I don't support this amendment, but I do appreciate the thought process that is behind it. So I encourage the committee to vote no on this.
Representative Nash, and then we'll go with Representative New, and then we're likely to go for a vote. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I understand the intent of your bill, you want to remove partisanship from this process, and yet you just decided that you're standing against something that would go that extra mile and remove people who, by your own admission when you shook your head, that it is a partisan activity. That baffles me. And for that reason, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask for a roll call on this amendment. This is something that I think, if your intent is really to be, Representative, we have decorum here, and I'm gonna, when I'm done. If your intent is to be, or to remove partisanship, this is a perfect amendment for that. And I'm just flabbergasted that you would urge a no vote.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, as I stated previously, I do agree that in the past, that many caucuses and conventions can be partisan. What I'm saying to you, and what I would want in the future for this bill, is that when we have more people engaged, and when we have put forward bills like this that gives the public a voice, in the future, if they attend a convention, if they attend a caucus, if they attend a party unit event to see what is that like, I want them to say, yes, I want to be engaged in this process. I don't want our parties to be so hyper-partisan. I'm a mediator, I want people to be able to work together. And I believe that when we open this process up to allow the ordinary person, who maybe has attended one caucus or one convention, to be able to participate in a commission like this and see that the process can be open and that they can have a voice and that every voice matters, then that's a good thing. So at this moment, as divided as politics is, I can maybe understand where you're coming from, but I'm hoping for something better. I'm hoping for something more collaborative, and for that reason, I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Representative Cleaborn, and I'm gonna make a comment and then I'll move to you. I believe that the 12 public members are actually selected 4 within the Republican Party, or the 2 major parties each get 4, and the remaining 4 are selected from sort of non-party affiliation with those 2 major parties. And I think that what this amendment does is it even allows those non-partisan, or those partisan members that are selected through the party process to not actually participate as well. So, Representative New.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we just heard a bill in which we talked very specifically about partisan politics and party politics. I mean, there are some definitions here, and while I appreciate the idea that we may move to a less hyper-partisan system, and I certainly feel like I try to do that. I think I have good relationships with lots of my colleagues on the other side of the table. I don't think hoping is a good way to establish law. And so I'm a little concerned about the language being used here, that we would hope that at some future time that this would change, because we are making law based on existing reality. And because of that, I would certainly encourage a yes vote on this amendment.
Thank you, Representative New. And with a roll call being called for, I will ask the Legislative Committee Assistant to call the roll.
Cherdine,
No.
Bonner? No. Nash?
Yes.
Bernardi? No. Albertson?
No.
Mann?
No.
And New?
Yes.
And O'Driscoll?
Yes.
3 ayes and 5 nays, the amendment is now adopted. The next amendment before us is 190097.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move that amendment.
Okay, Representative New, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We know that there are plenty of organizations that have a strong interest in the electoral process and in how redistricting plays out. So this amendment would ensure that any member, employee, or volunteer of a non-governmental organization with an interest in that process would be prohibited from serving on the commission.
Representative Cleveland.
I would like to, Mr. Chair and Representative New, I would like to say to Representative New that I really appreciated your comment in the last bill hearing, where you said that you appreciate fair, transparent elections, and you feel that that's important to government. And in that light, and in that vein, I would find it very difficult to ban someone from the League of Women Voters who does nothing but teach people how to vote. They're not partisan, and they would be banned by this amendment. I'm sorry, I would urge a no vote.
Thank you, Representative Cleveland. Representative New.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While certainly I'm sympathetic, probably lots of people would question whether the League of Women Voters is indeed nonpartisan. And I would ask for a roll call, Mr. Chair.
We will move to a roll call, but before that, this isn't British Parliament. You all actually allow us, as the committee members, to conduct our meeting and be respectful of that. So with the roll call being called, the clerk will take the roll.
Cherdine,
No.
Bonner? No. Nash?
Yes.
Bernardi?
No.
Albertson?
No.
Mann?
No.
New?
Yes.
O'Driscoll?
Yes.
Being 3 ayes and 5 nays. Being 5 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Representative Bernard.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you for calling on me. I just wanted to say, in regards to the last comment that was made, as legislators, we try not to question people's motives. And I would appreciate it when we have nonprofits and very respected organizations in our state that we not try to question their motives as well. So I need to get that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bernardi, and I'm sure that all members heard your concern. We will now move to A19-0098.
Mr. Chair, I'll take that.
Representative Driscoll.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I sort of think that this is an earlier chapter in the book, but we already know how the chapter's gonna end. My hope with the A1 was to strike a compromise. I suspect that there's not gonna be much support for the 98 amendment, but I will offer it. It eliminates the public member appointment process, and my middle ground is gonna be the A1, but we started with that, so do with what you will, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Representative Cleveland, to the 0098 amendment.
Mr. Chair and Representative Driscoll, I again urge a no vote on this, as it does exactly what you said, it takes out the public process.
Okay, the 0098 amendment, all members in favor say aye.
Aye.
All members opposed say no.
No.
The amendment is not adopted. 0099,
Thank you, Mr. Chair, I will move the 0099 amendment.
okay, 0099 is moved, please speak to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm assuming that this will not be taken, but, to my last amendment, this amendment goes even further and actually requires the Secretary of State to solicit recommendations from NGOs with an interest in the election process. I just, again, think there is a huge conflict of interest there, and I would encourage a yes vote.
Representative Cleveland, to the amendment.
Mr. Chair, Representative New, I would just like to say that it is a customary a practice of the Secretary of State to solicit members for all commissions, or the majority of commissions. They put out a monthly newsletter of commission appointments that are open. It is the most practical and efficient way for us to do this. In seeking consultation with the Secretary of State's office to see if this was something that was even possible, I was told that this is something they do in the normal routine of their work, solicit commission membership.
Mr. Chair.
Representative New.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, the Secretary of State soliciting for appointments, is it customary that the Secretary of State solicits groups that may and perhaps a conflict of interest in whatever commissions he is filling?
Representative Cleveland.
I would not say that the Secretary, Mr. Chair, Representative New. I would not say that it is customary for the Secretary of State to solicit any conflict of interest. The idea is that the Secretary of State would post that there are openings for this commission, that people who would be interested would apply. They would go through the screening process. If there was a conflict of interest, or if they were a person who did not meet the requirements, then their application would be set aside.
Mr. Chair.
Representative New.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I certainly understand that the Secretary of State would post the positions and accept applications, but this clearly goes above and beyond that. So is there a process for which the Secretary of State would specifically solicit from particular groups?
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative New, I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the same amendment that you're looking at. Page 1, line 20, delete everything after the period. The Secretary of State shall solicit recommendations for appointment to Redistricting Commission from non-governmental organizations with an interest in the election process. I think the question that you're having is you are reading non-governmental organizations who maybe exclusively have interest in the elections process, but that is not the word that is there. It is just non-governmental organizations, which could be, maybe a person who, well, I'll just leave it at that. I don't see that the restriction that you are implying is in the language.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my last question was much more broad than that. It was simply, does the Secretary of State, like I said, the Secretary of State, you had mentioned, already posts the available commissions, receives applications, et cetera. This goes a step beyond that and requires the Secretary of State to solicit specifically from non-governmental organizations with an interest in the election process. My question is that currently done in practice? Is there a process for that currently in place?
Mr. Chair.
Representative Cleveland.
One I will say to you, I do not work in the Secretary of State's office. I have never worked in the Secretary of State's office. What I understand is this, that when they are posting a commission appointments of any type, they will often say, we are looking for members of the public. We are looking for members who are optometrists. We are looking for people who are blind. We are looking for people who work with people who have varying abilities of sight. They might put all kinds of qualifications in there depending on what they're trying to accomplish. The idea of the bill is that we would have a broad selection of individuals to choose from, and then the selection process would occur as is outlined in the bill itself.
Thank you, Representative Cleveland. If I could just add a little bit of clarity, I think as the representative spoke to, that when we are looking at appointments to commissions in certain areas, the Secretary of State does do outreach out into those areas. And I think with non-governmental organizations involved in the election process, it would make sense to ask some of them for applications as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Knapp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, since it involved a question of the Secretary of State and the author said that she never has, perhaps the Secretary is still here or has somebody here that could maybe help us with that?
I believe so.
Representative Nash, I think we can call him up here if he hasn't left yet. We will shoot him a note and find out if he's still around. If he is, we can have him come up and
Should we keep talking about the amendment then?
well, no, I actually think what we should do is set aside this amendment and move to the next one, and when he gets here, we can retake this up. So I'd like to, he's really, really fast, I've heard. And I believe that Secretary Simon, or at least someone from his office, is here, and they are more than able to speak to soliciting recommendations for appointment to the Redistricting Commission. Please come forward, state your name for the record, and if you could speak to Amendment 0099.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Julie Strother with the Secretary of State's office, and I apologize, I wasn't listening, and I think I might have been behind when it cut out. But my understanding was the question goes to how we solicit recommendations for appointments to the commission. We do monthly send out a notice of all open positions, including, I believe what I heard was said, whether they are just general public positions or if they are a representative from a certain community or group. And so that can be profession, it can be an interest area, like someone who represents individuals with disabilities, or home care workers, or optometrists, as was the example, or it can be a member of the general public, and we post those notices now and collect the applications to the open appointment process.
Thank you, Ms. Struthers, and Representative New, I'll give you a little bit more latitude, but
Because I've got someone that
we
actually.
still have another
posted.
20 bills, amendments to get through.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can I just have clarification, Ms. Strother, and thank you so much, that is super helpful. So is that different than in lines 1.8 through 1.20, it says that the Secretary of State shall open a widely publicized process that encourages eligible residents of the state to apply for membership on the Redistricting Commission. Is the method of solicitation, does it currently fall under that guideline? Or are there additional guidelines for soliciting for other commissions?
Ms. Struthers.
Mr. Chair and Representative, I think our goal is to be soliciting widely across the state of Minnesota for our current positions that are published. We operate a website that people can look at all of the open appointment positions that are available. We have a monthly email list that goes out, and we also maintain sort of a static, we have a searchable database and a static list of those positions that people are seeking applications for. And so our goal is for that to be made widely available to all Minnesotans, and encouraging Minnesotans to apply. We also, like we do with voter registration, if we're invited to community events where people are interested in learning about participating in state government, we've partnered with other agencies about providing information about how to apply to all boards and commissions and open positions through community events as well.
Mr. Chair, last question.
Representative New, last question.
I promise, last one. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Struther, is there a mechanism then currently that you solicit specifically from very specific groups? The things that you listed are more broad still, website, email list, unless you have specific email lists for different groups, a static list, community events. Are there mechanisms in place by which you solicit very specifically from different groups, or is it this broad?
Ms. Struthers.
Mr. Chair, Representative, we don't have, for example, when we're looking for optometrists was an example, we don't have a list of optometrists, but we do specify in our public solicitation that what we're looking for are optometrists to apply for this position. And so, the different positions run the gamut. So we send them widely to the public, but we are targeting a specific group sometimes with that solicitation, and not soliciting the general public to apply, but people who fit a certain criteria for that board.
Find that.
Yeah.
In the broad.
Thank you, Ms. Struthers. So we have the 0099 amendment before us. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no.
No.
The amendment is not adopted. We now move to 0101.
That's me, Mr. Chair.
Representative Nash, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this, the 101 really seeks to make this, I guess, more ironclad, if you will. And I'm going to phone a friend to Mr. Gehring, and because I have it right here as to what all these are, but nobody wants to read this. Trust me, you don't. But Mr. Gehring, if you could just generally give us an idea of the broad definition of a public official, because it goes on for a couple of pages as to what that is, and it gets all the way down to Soil and Water Board and member of the Minnesota Ballpark Authority. So it's fairly detailed.
Mr. Gehring.
Mr. Chair and committee members, so the definition of public official that you see in this amendment is based on the Campaign Finance Board law, which requires public officials to file notices and economic interest statements with the board. The definition of public official is designed to include a variety of types of roles in state and local government where a person would have a high degree of political access or a high degree of influence on policymaking. So, for example, agency commissioners and political appointees in the governor's office, as well as other officials that are serving similarly high roles like that throughout state government.
Thank you, Mr. Gehring.
Thank you, Mr. Gehring. Representative Nash.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just very simply, I think if your bill becomes law, and I'm hoping it doesn't, but if it does, I think that this should actually be something that you put into the bill and really take seriously.
Representative Cleveland.
Thank you very much, Representative, Mr. Chair, Representative Nash. I wish that you and I had had an opportunity to sit down before this meeting and really talk about this. There are some ideas that you have that I think I would really like to delve into a little bit deeper. I think we could find some places of really good common ground there.
So this is one.
Yeah.
That close.
You were so close, but I like the way your mind works. That's an important thing. When I looked into this a little bit deeper, I was told that in greater Minnesota, because the communities are so small, there might be a commissioner on a committee who would then be also excluded from participating in this type of opportunity. So in larger or more dense populations, it might be able that this would work and work really well. But when we get outside into greater Minnesota, where people hold multiple roles in different times, they would be excluded. So for that reason, I would urge a no vote.
Mr. Chair,
Representative Nash.
thank you, Mr. Chair, I'll be brief. Well, even though I'm in the 7-county metro, most would argue that I'm living in greater Minnesota. Come visit, leave your money behind. But I would say that knowing the commissioners that serve out there, that there's no mystery as to where they are from a political ideology perspective. Even though it's not on the ballot, people know. And I think that if your goal is to truly be completely nonpartisan, that this is a reasonable amendment. And again, I'm kind of surprised that it's not something that you're going to take.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative Nash, like I said, I do believe that if you and I sat down together and we had a little more time to work on this besides this committee that's within through 12 or 20 amendments, we could probably find a place where you and I would agree how far down in that list we should go. But at this moment, I would encourage the committee to take a no vote.
Thank you, Representative Cleveland. All those in favor of the amendment 0101, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
The amendment does not prevail, but you're getting closer.
I'm glad you're trying to make me feel like I'm making ground.
So 0103.
I will move the 0103, Mr. Chair.
To your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, this section of the bill lays out requirements for people to be considered, as members of the commission. And this language is extraordinarily narrow, and interestingly, I think Representative Cleburne's last comments would indicate that she very purposefully does not want to be exclusive in doing this. She's concerned about disenfranchising rural Minnesota, which I certainly appreciate. I represent a rural community. I am outside of the 7-county metro. However, I am confident that there are very few people in my community who have experience with outreach to community groups to encourage civic participation with an emphasis on historically disenfranchised groups. I simply live in a community where that's not a significant issue, and so in my community, there's going to be virtually no one who fits that bill. So I think that this is very unnecessarily narrow in scope. While I certainly agree that it would be nice to have some members of the committee who would have this kind of experience and whatnot, I'm very concerned about this being so encompassing that it's a requirement for everyone.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative New, I would argue that there are historically disenfranchised people who live in your community, and often they're women. And so, in that vein, I encourage a no vote.
Mr.
Representative Halpern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious if Representative New has reached out to historically disenfranchised groups in her district in order to understand the need for or lack of need for this as she is determining. I think that hearing from these groups was very important. So.
Thank you, Representative Halverson, and I do not want to get back and forth, but I'll let you respond to the question since you probably.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think it's important to note, I actually think it is really important to have people on the commission with this kind of experience. My point is that this is requiring that of every member of the commission. And this isn't related to people who have experience historically disenfranchised. This is very specific, has experience with outreach to community groups to encourage civic participation with an emphasis on historically disenfranchised groups. This is very specific. This is not saying, hey, it's a good idea, we should have members of this commission with this experience. This is saying every member of the commission must have this experience. And again, it's not people who are historically disenfranchised. It's people who have worked in that capacity. Those are very different things.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair and Representative New, I appreciate your passion for this, and I hope that you will have this passion for inclusivity in all aspects of legislation that we will hopefully work on together. When we were looking at this, when I was working with this, the language that you're referencing, page 229, line 29,
and 28.
It says page 2, line 29, deletes everything from the semicolon. Which would be,
Yes, with the
before the semicolon, with emphasis on historically disenfranchised groups. It says has experience with outreach to community groups to encourage civic participation. It's just asking, have you worked with anyone other than people who look and behave and are exactly like yourself, basically? Because I just don't have a problem with the language as it's written, and I appreciate your amendment for what you consider to be more inclusive, but I feel this is more inclusive. I asked for another.
Representative New, please be brief, because we want to get to your other great amendments.
That's fine, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All those in favor of Amendment 0103, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no.
No.
Now, the amendment does not prevail. Now we're going to move to 0104.
That's me, Mr. Chair.
Okay, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sometimes we name things, and I'm naming this amendment more is better. And, you know, again, the author has said that she wants to really expand the pool and make sure that we've got a great representation of everybody. So I think that widening the pool, doubling the pool would be a great thing to do.
To the amendment, Representative Cleveland.
I actually, the only question I had when I read the amendment, Mr. Chair, Representative Nash, was, would this add additional cost? You know, how much longer would it take for us to enlarge the pool? How many more people would we have to review? I actually don't have a problem with this amendment. So,
We're off to a good start, Mr. Chair. Well, Mr. Chair and Representative.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the author, you're going to get a fiscal note on this bill. And if you chose to engross that, it'd be great. And I'm sure we'll see that then.
yeah, but at this moment in time, I don't have a problem.
Representative Bonner.
Mr. Chair, Representative Cleveland, I'm just curious, if the Secretary of State has been consulted on this, and if he has an opinion on whether that would create, an undue burden on his office to double those numbers. Certainly, I appreciate the intent of being all-inclusive, but we do know that a fiscal note would be required here, and we do know that that would potentially require, staffing from the Secretary of State's office. And I'm wondering if that has been done either by Representative Nash or by yourself, and if that needs to be done before you could, accept this amendment.
Representative Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Bonner. When I first approached the Secretary of State to sit with me and go through the bill and to make sure that I wasn't doing anything that would really be in opposition to law as it currently is in our election systems. When I asked about the cost, we talked about the bill as it is currently written. And so these numbers were in fact in half. And he said at that time, he didn't see that this was a problem. But as I understand the way I have written the bill, actually legislative costs. We haven't, it doesn't say that the Secretary of State will pay for this. So, it would not be his budget, it would be our budget. So, unless I'm wrong in that, but that is,
So, thank you, Representative Cleveland. I know you have a question, Representative Nash. We have, the Secretary of State's office, it's magic. If you'd like to come.
And Mr. Chair,
Answer the question.
if I could, just for clarity's sake, and because her family's a constituent, it's Strother.
I'm sorry.
There is no S.
I'm sorry. I'm
At
tired.
the end,
I've got a
at the
call.
end.
Please forgive me. Estrada.
and the question of the cost, and would it be an undue burden? So now we have, this is identified.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, this bill would have a cost to the Office of the Secretary of State, and I think that that's a question that usually gets resolved in a fiscal note that we would work up on what that would be. Increasing the number of applicants to process, and finalists would, I presume, increase that cost, the processing cost. But that's a question that our team that works on fiscal notes would analyze. That's my assumption, though, is that if we are increasing the pool, it could have an additional cost. Whether that's a marginal cost or not, I just don't know.
Thank you, Ms. Estrada. Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Cleveland. That said, doubling this here, and of course, even as we emphasized here that could increase also costs to the legislative body as well. I know that the recent budget just came out, and we have talked about the fact that we have, here in Minnesota, while blessed, we have brought a little bit less into the coffers. And there are some other potential items looming in the near term that we will need to be considering as part of our budget. And of course, I think we want to all agree in this room that we want to be as fiscally responsible with the people's money as possible. So I guess my thought would just be that I would want to get more information on that before doubling those numbers, because I think the pool of 120 is quite generous to begin with. But certainly, I'm not opposed to increasing those numbers, but I think because we also have to be good stewards of the people's money, I would want to be conscientious about making that choice.
Thank you, Representative Bonner. I would actually like to move to a vote.
Oh, Mr. Chair, if I could. It'll be very brief.
You may be hurting yourself,
Well,
Representative.
Mr. Chair, I do appreciate your willingness to take this on, and in listening to Ms. Strother's description of the methodology, a lot of those are fixed costs, and the back-end processing to vet these, I can't imagine it's going to be intense from a time perspective to double it. So I do appreciate your support on this amendment, Representative Claiborne.
Thank you, members. We will take a vote on the amendment 104. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted.
All right.
I would get too excited. Amendment 0105, who will be taking that? Representative Driscoll, to your amendment.
One of the things that will happen on the commission, the way that we see it right now, is that there will be individuals who will solicit to be appointed who may have political affiliations, and there may be those individuals who have political leanings, but no political affiliation. This is just simply asking people to have a political affiliation in order to be on there, to allow all members who are on the commission to know, if you will, the oath and stripes of the members that they're working with and endeavoring to create fair and just legislative districts. I encourage the members of the
Representative Cleveland.
I am so sorry, I was speaking to the Secretary of State representative, Ms. Strother. As I read the amendment, I read that you just did not want to say say no to the no party? You're saying everyone has a party, is that what you're saying?
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, because we're gonna have some folks on there who are gonna have partisan, affiliations, persuasions, and others who would not be on there, just to be able to put everybody in the same playing field, that there should be disclosure of a political affiliation, so that the players know who they are working with. So those who don't may have political leanings, that others who have already disclosed their political ilk, who are members of that committee or commission has been appointed. It just kinda helps, I think, clear the air of some questions. So, again, I would encourage the vote, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Driscoll, I would not question somebody's word if they said that they had no party affiliation, that they were interested in clean elections. In being in my community, there were many people who identified as having no party affiliation, and they would be very upset if they were told that they had to choose one of the major parties. So I would urge a no vote.
Thank you, Representative Cleveland. We will take a vote on amendment 0105. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
The amendment is not adopted. Now we move to 0106.
That's me, Mr. Chair.
To your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the 106. I'm going to urge its adoption. Mr. Chair, and to the author, I think everybody who was above ground during the 1998 election for governor here in the state of Minnesota recognized that that was a bit of a hanging curveball. So I'm trying to be bipartisan here and urge you to adopt this amendment because in ranking order for that particular election, it was Jesse Ventura, which I'm still trying to process, Norm Coleman, and then Skip Humphreys took dead last. So in the way you got your bill written, the DFL party would be excluded from the next consideration. So I think that just trying to be fair and honest here, and I would urge you to push it out to 2 gubernatorial elections.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative Nash, you and I are in a mind meld. No, when I saw it, I thought, this is absolutely right. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Thank you for the amendment. Member Sutton.
Representative O'Driscoll, and I hope you realize that you could be hurting more life.
No, I'm actually not. My response would have been less than it took you to recognize me. I want to give all my future amendments to Representative Nash.
Thank you, Representative Driscoll. To the 0106 amendment, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The amendment is adopted.
Mr. Chair, I would just like the members of the audience tonight to realize that we just saw major bipartisan work here.
I know we're not allowed.
Again, it's not British Parliament. To amendment 0107, who will put that forward?
Mr. Chair, that's me again. I'm going to hope for a threefer.
To your amendment, Representative.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think that the goal here is transparency is something that we've been hearing for a long time. I think that it's a really important issue. And I think if people want to know the goings on and how things were decided, that opening a commission up to the Data Practices Act in all totality is a wise idea. So I would urge the adoption.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair and Representative Nash, I'm afraid we're not going to hit time on this one. But I like the idea that you put forward. But as a mediator, what I also know to be true is that oftentimes when people are making decisions and they're not sure and they're trying to process an idea, sometimes they need to have time to work on a draft before they make something public. So while I want everything to be as transparent as possible, once the group has come to an agreement, then I would say it should be transparent. It should be open, that they should see all of the work that the committee has put together. But in the drafting process, I would say no.
And Mr. Chair.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I had the great pleasure to serve as a city council member and a mayor prior to coming here to the State House, as did Representative O'Driscoll and I think a few others. During the work sessions that we went through, to create our budget, to create any policy, that was all public data. And even drafts, even ideas, harebrained ideas, sometimes, when we were building new programs we did here, some self-professed harebrained ideas by some of the people that I served with on city council. All of that is public data. You can go back to the city of Waconia's records and find when one of our former city council members wanted to have a pickleball league, and his idea was that it was gonna generate $1 million. I can tell you that no pickleball league is ever gonna create $1 million. But that harebrained idea is public information. If your desire and your drive is to create full transparency, and to create fairness in its end product, it seems to me that opening it up to the Data Practice Act would be a no-brainer.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative Nash, I would invite you, Representative Nash, to work with me on a full transparency bill for the Minnesota State House of Representatives. And at this time, in this process, I would ask that this amendment be defeated, but I would invite an opportunity to work with you on full transparency for the Minnesota House.
Well, Mr. Chair, just very briefly.
Representative Nash.
Mr. Chair.
You might be heard in later amendments.
Well, Mr. Chair, Representative Claiborne just recommended a full transparency for the Minnesota House. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something that's completely different. Completely different. So to deflect that to here, this is what we're talking about. So I would urge the adoption.
Thank you, Representative Nash. All those in favor of the 0107 amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. No. The amendment is not adopted. 0108.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will move the 0108 amendment.
To your amendment, Representative Zinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Cleveland. So this section references commission staff. And please correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but the only thing that I am seeing in the bill laying out who that staff would be is on page 9, lines 7 and 8, where it just says the Legislative Coordinating Commission shall provide administrative support to the Redistricting Commission. Am I correct, or is there, do you envision another mechanism for providing staff?
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair and Representative New. I'm looking at the language and I'm trying to think about this. I believe that the language is written so that if there is staff, then there would be that requirement for discretion and discretion's not the right word. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use that word. I just want to go back to the language so I'm sure I have the right. On page 2. We're deleting everything after the period on page 4, line 31. After the commission staff must not communicate with anyone outside of the commission staff regarding the content of the plan. The language is written just to say anyone who is working on this is to keep it confidential. To your question, do I anticipate staff? I don't know. It's a protection if there is staff. At this moment, there are not funds for hiring staff allocated. So do I anticipate staff? No. If there is staff in the future, I would say then there would be some administrative support. There has to be some sort of administrative support, but that administrative support would be held to the same confidentiality as the members.
Representative New.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find the language of if odd. I can't imagine us doing our work here without staff. There's no chance we can do it. So it seems clear that there has to be staff. However, there is nothing laid out in the bill about how that staff would be selected, who that staff would be, what their level of expertise would be. So the reason for this amendment is simply that right now it says commission staff must not communicate with anyone outside of commission staff, so with each other, regarding the content of a plan. So my concern with that, and my reason for the amendment is, again, that's just very limiting. And I know often, you know, in committee hearings, we see folks phone a friend, right? I wish we could know everything, but none of us do. I mean, there's just so much to know. And it seems like that commission staff may occasionally need to phone a friend for an expertise that they just might not have, a question they might not have an answer to. So this would just allow them the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Representative New. To Amendment 0108. Oh, Representative Bonner.
Mr. Chair, Representative Cleveland, and I know this is gonna come as a mixed bag and possibly even slightly a bit of a surprise. And in the respect that I do have an agreement to some degree with Representative New in that I feel like that language is a little bit unclear. That said, I do actually think I understand the spirit or the intent of that language. And for that reason, I will be voting against the amendment. However, it would be my recommendation that perhaps reviewing that language, perhaps with Representative New or with other staff, might be appropriate in this particular case. I suspect the spirit here is that anyone working with the commission should be keeping it confidential, but that is perhaps not worded in the best light. So that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bonner. We will now move to vote on Amendment 0108. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
The amendment is not adopted. We will now move to 0109. Who has that?
Mr. Chair, I will move the 0109.
To your amendment, Representative New.
In that same section, this would just mean that, so right now, it's very restrictive on who can communicate with who. This would make it so that members of staff, members of the commission and staff of the commission, can communicate with each other regarding the plan. And that might actually solve some of those problems with expertise and questions that they can communicate with one another.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative New, I actually really liked your language. I thought you tightened it up very nicely. It doesn't cause any substantive change, so I would be happy to go along with this amendment. Thank you.
Okay. We will now take a vote on Amendment 0109. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. That amendment is adopted. Thank you, Representative New and Representative O'Driscoll. We wish you well moving forward. We will now move to Amendment 0111.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will move to 0111.
Representative New, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and since you liked the last one, I think you might like this one too. I'm hopeful. So this one in the next section, in lines 5.4 through 5.7, just adds a few words. It says for accept public input and comments, so of course we want public input and comments. Commission members and staff must not have any communication about the content or development of the plan outside of public hearings with anyone except other staff or members of the commission. So really, it's just moving that language to this section as well, the language that we just took.
Representative Cleveland.
As I looked at that, I'm trying to figure out my own notes here. I think that's okay. Excuse me. I'm sorry, I need to go through the proper channels. Mr. Chair, Representative New, thank you very much for the language. I agree with your amendment.
Okay, to Amendment 0111. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. Now to 0112.
Withdraw the amendment.
Your Honor.
I almost said Your Honor. I withdraw the amendment.
That's okay, thank you.
You've been promoted.
The amendment is withdrawn. 0113.
Mr. Chair, that's me.
Okay,
So, Mr. Chair, and to the
to
author.
your amendment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move the 0113, urge its adoption. You know, the elections committee and elections in general, you're talking that you would like a broad consensus on things, and I think that given the magnitude of what you're asking, that you should have a complete unanimous vote coming out of that group. You know, I know that the long-standing tradition of this committee is that we work bipartisan, and that our work product will indeed be a bipartisan work product. Looking forward to that. But I think that also the product that your commission were to become law should also be something that comes out unanimously. And I would urge the adoption.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative Nash, I wish that I could support this amendment. I do not. To have one person be able to tie up the entire work of a commission is not something that I think would be good for our process or good for it could lead to more additional costs, more additional expenditures. I thought it was prudent to say at least 13, so I encourage a no vote on this.
Thank you, Representative Cleveland. We'll vote on amendment 0113. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no?
No.
The amendment is not adopted. The next one, 0114.
Mr. Chair, I'll take that.
Okay, Representative Driscoll, to your amendment.
Mr. Chair, I am falling very behind in the count here tonight, and I'm hoping that I can at least get back in the game on this. 114 says that if the impaneled commission is unable to come up with a result, and because time is of the essence on this to be able to be ready for the election season, that a panel of retired judges will be appointed. Again, if the enjoined commission is unable to come to an agreement, we can't not have these being compliant with federal law, so we need to move it forward.
Okay. Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Driscoll, I just want to make sure I'm on the right amendment. We are on page 7, line 8.
Correct.
In the bill itself, it would go to a judge-only panel. What I would like to offer maybe as a court could order a judge-only commission, and this may be more efficient. I'm trying to figure out where this, from the secretary. I asked for your forgiveness, just one moment. If a plan has enjoined after the commission expires, the court enjoins can may direct a new commission to. I would maybe say if, I would be willing to modify your amendment and say after round 2 or after round 3, but I would want the commission to have another opportunity to do the model.
Representative Cleveland, I think that's a significant change
That
to
is-
a proposed amendment, and I'm not so sure that we can change that here.
Well, then I would encourage a no vote.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would like to have maybe Mr. Gearing to explain maybe more articulately than I did about the time is of the essence to get this. So if the panel is expired, we don't have a plan. We gotta have something. We can't have a second or a third panelman, because the clock is ticking.
Mr. Gearing.
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Driscoll, so what this amendment is doing is amending the section of the bill that applies when, after a redistricting plan has been enacted into law and the redistricting commission is dissolved, if there's a subsequent lawsuit that challenges the maps that have been adopted, this language allows the court to direct a new commission to be created to draft a remedial plan to address the issues in the lawsuit. As drafted in the bill currently, it allows the court to create an entire new commission that has the retired judges plus the public members. This proposed amendment would allow the court in the bill to instead direct a new commission that would consist only of retired judges and not the additional public members to do the remedial plan.
Representative Cleveland.
I would urge no vote.
Okay. To the amendment 0114, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no?
No.
The amendment is not adopted.
Mr. Chair, if I might, on the 15 and 16 amendments, those are mine.
Okay.
In the interest of trying to expedite things, perhaps we could go with B116, because if that one is adopted, we don't need B115, because the time parameter, or the percentage parameters are more generous in one than the other, so the one that is more, less generous, if you will, would be adopted. There's no need to take the other amendment, so I'm just suggesting that we start with the 116, which talks about the population deviation from 1.5 to being 0.5%, and that's in the 15 is 1.5 to 1%. So
Representative Driscoll, I'm not 100% following what you're saying relative to the difference between the two, because my understanding is the 115 reduces it to 1%, whereas the 116 actually makes it smaller.
the population deviation, so if the smaller is acceptable, then we don't have to go to the other amendment.
Okay.
But if it's not, then we would go to the other amendment, hoping that that would be a middle.
I'm going to encourage you to start with the 115.
I'll take the chair's advice.
Okay?
Right.
To your amendment, Representative Driscoll.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I think we've already discussed it.
Representative Cleveland.
Thank you, Chair, and Representative Driscoll, you just scored the point.
Hey!
So we are
Well,
going to
we haven't
one-
voted yet.
So in lieu of time, we are not doing 116, we are doing 115. I just want to make sure I'm saying the right thing. And we are agreeing to one.
Representative Cleveland, the amendment before us is 0115,
Correct.
and I would ask for your opinion on 115.
I would urge.
As
a
the
ye-
author.
a yes vote.
Okay. All those in favor of 115, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Congratulations, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Then I will withdraw the 116.
Okay. And then before us now, we have Amendment 117.
Mr. Chair, that's mine. I will move the 117.
Representative Nash, to your amendment.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and to the author, in page 8, starting in line 8.15, going all the way down, it gives examples of communities of interest. Things change over time, and I think that if you're going to try to really write a tight, I lost my team here. If you're going to try to write a really tight bill, I think that removing those examples is going to really open it up for a lack of having to come back if this were to become law. Because I think that it's a very, very tight description, and I would imagine that there are people in other parts of the state that would find themselves not in that list. So I would urge the adoption.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair and Representative Nash, I would say to you, my intent in including that language was so that the ordinary person would have some idea of examples. Are there examples that, in language that you would like to see in this? Since you've said that not everyone would find themselves in those groups, are there examples that you would like to add?
Representative Nash.
The thing, Mr. Chair, and to the author, I'm trying to, I guess, broaden it, make it very open-ended, and I'm not really sure what the definition of an ordinary person is, and that's something that I try to avoid using. But I think that if you just remove that, it's going to open it up for a much broader cross-section. I think that if you look at what you've got in there, it could be somewhat tighter than I think that we would like to enact into a law that's going to look to create a one Minnesota approach. So I would urge its adoption.
Representative Cleveland.
Chair Dane, Representative Nash, I appreciate your words of wisdom. What I would say is, to the committee, at this time, I would this bill is being voted on to lay over, is that correct?
That's correct.
What I would ask the committee to do at this moment is to vote no, and it's possible that I may revisit this language with an author's amendment.
Thank you, Representative Claiborne. To the 0117 amendment, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no? No, the amendment does not prevail. 0118 to that amendment.
Mr. Chair, I will move that.
Representative Nash to the amendment.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the amendment would really seek to sort of remove the partisanship in the bill. I think that that's something that's, again, a pretty important issue. And I think that this, again, if your end product is to be blind to partisanship, then this is a really good amendment to bring to your bill.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative Nash, if we were to remove the partisan symmetry bias that's on page 8, line 828, I fear that we may actually have more partisanship, so I encourage a no vote.
Thank you, Representative Claiborne. So to the 0118 amendment.
And Mr. Chair.
Representative Nash.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that assessment necessarily. In your lines 7.14 and 15, prohibited information, you say, that's page 7, says that there's no plan shall be drawn to purposely favor or disfavor a political party or candidate. And now in 828331, you're talking about partisan symmetry. Again, I just think that that's something that would be a wise amendment to take on.
Thank you, Representative Nash. We'll take a vote on the 0118 amendment. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no?
No.
The amendment is not adopted. To amendment 0119.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's me.
Representative Nash, to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This would delete parts and insert local government districts that must be redistricted under sections 204B.135 subdivision 1 or 2. Again, back to my previous history as a mayor, city councilman. This is something that we did, I guess. But if your bill were to become reality, is it your intent then also to have this redistricting commission redraw all lines for cities and such? Because we had 2 wards in the city of Waconia. So I'm guessing by the reading of your bill that you would intend that this also gets done by your commission for, say, the city of Waconia or Norwood Young America or Hamburg, New Germany, Watertown, Mayor, places like that.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, I would like to ask, because I've not been a city, a local elected, I would like to ask Mr. Gehring if he could please help me with this as to exactly what this language would do.
Mr. Gehring.
Mr. Chair, Representative Claiborne, so what this amendment does effectively is to take out the population caps that are in the bill as drafted right now. So right now, what your bill is saying is that for county commissioner districts, county parks, soil and water conservation district, et cetera, in counties with a population of more than 100,000 people, or in large cities, so a city with a population greater than 75,000 people, then what would happen is that in those areas, the local jurisdiction would be required to have a commission and to meet this 1.5% population standard. Representative Nash's amendment is instead expanding that requirement to include all local jurisdictions in the state, so regardless of the population, every county and local government would be required to have a commission and also meet the 1.5% standard.
Representative Cleveland.
I would encourage a no vote.
Thank you, Representative. We will now take a vote on amendment 0119. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no? No. The amendment is not adopted. Amendment 0120.
Mr. Chair, that's mine.
To your amendment, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move the 0120. Well, this would then require that all commissions appointed under this subdivision would meet the same qualification standards as has been spelled out. And you know, again, if you're going to try to make it really solid and fair and thinking about all aspects of your bill, I would urge this adoption.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair and Representative Nash, I do appreciate the thought. In smaller communities, when I was reading through this and I was thinking about how this would work and how it would play out, I kept thinking there may be smaller communities that may not have the capacity to reach all of those qualification standards. So to the members of the committee, I would encourage it.
And Mr. Chair.
Representative Nash.
Mr. Chair, I guess I'm just kind of, I'm a little mystified because Representative Cleveland, earlier you had said that you feel that fair representation from all parts of the state can be achieved, and yet now you're saying that you don't believe that can be achieved. So you're kind of contradicting yourself from earlier testimony. So I'm a little confused.
Representative.
Please may I ask Mr. Gearing, just help me clarify this.
Representative Cleveland.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll let Representative Nash finish his statement, and then we'll move forward to.
My apologies, Representative Nash.
Well, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess again, if your earlier statement that you believe, and we'll pick on Representative Fabian because he's gone. Way up in Roseau, you said earlier that you believe that there is enough people there and there's a cross section there, even though you didn't say Roseau, that places in the outstate can find these people. Well, then let's do this. Let's go ahead and say that you know, people in Waconia or Watertown or Carver County or Scott County or Stearns, or they can be found. I think that would really make a very good amendment for you to take on. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Nash, and to some of your statements prior to going to you, Representative Cleveland. I think when you believe it was a contradiction in your eyes, I think it's fine to recognize that as yours, but to say to her that it's a contradiction, I think goes a little bit beyond our bounds of what we want to do here. Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, may I please ask Mr. Gearing to just go over this amendment one more time so that I'm sure that I'm understanding it fully?
Mr. Gearing.
Mr. Chair, Representative Cleveland, so this amendment also amends the section of law that governs the redistricting of the local districts. So because the previous amendment wasn't adopted, you still have the population standards. So at large counties and large cities, what this requires is that those jurisdictions would have to have a redistricting commission to draw their boundaries. And then what the Representative Nash's amendment is proposing is that you apply the same qualification standards for membership on that commission. So for example, they can't be a lobbyist, they can't be a legislator or family member of the legislator. All the qualifications that are earlier in the bill for the state commission would then also apply to the members of the local commissions.
Representative Cleveland.
Point of clarification. So it would be only for the cities that were greater than 75,000 and for the counties with a larger population. Is that correct?
Mr. Gearing.
Mr. Chair, Representative Cleveland, yes, that's correct.
In that case, I would be all right with the amendment.
Okay, to the amendment 0120. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Representative Nash, you're on a roll. Now, the last one amendment, and I want to thank everybody for being patient, is 0121. And as a reminder, we do have a couple more bills yet to get through tonight, so who will move this amendment?
Mr. Chair, I will. My chance to move from bronze to coastal overnight.
Representative O'Driscoll to the amendment.
I was looking at the bill and I noticed that there's money that's going to be appropriated or to be spent, but there wasn't an appropriation in your bill, so I just had it drafted to include that. So if you're interested in doing that tonight, we have a vehicle in which for you to be able to do that if you'd like to add for the appropriation, the Legislative Coordinating Commission as well as Secretary of State's office. So,
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair and Representative O'Driscoll, I may be confused about this. So I will seek guidance from the committee. I heard Secretary of State say earlier this evening that we could not appropriate money for the next cycle because this is not taking place today. And I thought that was my understanding from Ways and Means as well. So it could be that I'm wrong. Could I have clarification on that, please?
Mr. Gary.
Mr. Chair, Representative Cleveland, so, and Secretary of State staff is here so they can maybe clarify what the Secretary said. I think he was indicating that you can't appropriate out 4 years in advance.
He said he did.
And so, yeah, so this, because we are now within the budgeting cycle for the redistricting cycle, that we're inside the period where you can appropriate money for these activities.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, in that case, I would be willing to say yes today.
Okay. To the 0121 amendment, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No? The amendment is adopted. To House File 1605. But the big question is, are we going to be brief or are we going to be long? Representative Nash. 'Cause
Well, Mr. Chair, I've got questions, and it's traditional that we ask the author questions of the bill. Certainly there were aspects of the bill that we didn't cover in our amendment, so just a couple questions.
Okay, if it's a couple questions, we will move to
Sure.
questions.
All right.
Representative Nash.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the author, you're trying to avoid gerrymandering, you say, and I'm just curious, can you give us some examples of gerrymandering here in Minnesota?
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, I would just say to you, Representative Nash, please look at the district that I represent, 34A. Look at the southern border of my district. And then I would like for you to go to look at the boats that come out of that jagged area just south of my district. And whether it is truly gerrymandered or not, it is not, I know that when we were more cohesive, there were more votes. So do I have concrete examples? No. But let's be proactive and let's not have gerrymandering. And let's make sure that all of our elections are free and clear and the voters get to choose their elected. That's all I'm asking for with this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, to the author, the courts through your district, and the definition of gerrymandering, and this is kind of a thing with me. My undergrad and graduate work were in GIS and political geography, so we actually went through the concept of gerrymandering and walked through that. I guess by definition of the fact that the courts drew your district and your example of gerrymandering as your district, that's not truly gerrymandered, because the definition of gerrymandering is to advantage one political party or an incumbent. So the courts drew that, and I guess I would encourage you to find some real examples of gerrymandering, because if that's your example, then the courts drew that one. So, Mr. Chair, also,
Representative Nash.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Hypothetical question for you. Let's say in a rare moment of kumbaya-ism, we come together as a legislature and we come up with a clean redistricting map. What happens with your commission?
Representative Cleveland.
After the maps are drawn, the commission, it stops.
Mr. Chair.
I'm confused by the question.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I meant in advance. Let's say it happens in advance of the convening of your commission. Again, we find ourselves with time on our hands, and we get the job done. And I got a couple laughs on that one. I hope that it's been funnier. But so we get the job done. What happens to your commission if, before we go sine die, we actually took care of that and everybody came out of it with a vote for that particular map? What happens?
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair and Representative Nash, with all due respect, I was told by Representative New today not to do ifs and hopes. So I will just say to you, I wish we could do that, but I don't see the likelihood of it, so I'm putting the bill forward.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Representative Cleaborn. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But it actually is something that should be addressed in your bill. Because it is our duty currently to get this done. I'm just, if you haven't addressed it, then I guess I'm just, again, I'm a little confused.
Representative Nash.
Thank you.
I will just make a statement here. This is being laid over for possible inclusion. We'll have another opportunity to maybe work with the chief author and work out some language that might address the issue you're concerned about.
Sure. Last question, Mr. Chair.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the author, we heard from one of your testifiers earlier that a coalition of people were working to come up with this, with the assumptions in this bill and crafting this bill. What was the makeup of that particular group? Did you seek people from the outstate? Did you seek people from a lot of different ethnic diversities, or what? I guess I'm just kind of wondering how this work product that we got in front of us was created, because if your intent is to reach out to people all across the state from all different walks of life, did you have a farmer? Did you have somebody from southern Minnesota, northern Minnesota, the Iron Range? Did you have people who are in trades, people who are professors? Just wondering, because again, if your product is not created by people who look like you're trying to get that done, then I have questions about the veracity of what it is you have in front of us.
Representative Cleveland.
Mr. Chair, Representative Nash, I greatly appreciate the question. I have been very fortunate to have been interested in this for quite some time, long before my time in my whole 9 weeks here as a representative. And I have had the opportunity to speak with people in greater Minnesota. I have had opportunities to speak to farmers. I have had opportunities to speak to people on the trains, in the airports, in Minnesota, outside of Minnesota, to just find out what is working well and how do we let every person feel heard. What do people want the election process to look like? How do we get fair districts? If there's an overwhelming desire for the people who live in my district and for the people that I've spoken to have that sense that they actually have a say in who gets elected. And that starts with clean lines and it starts with clean districts. So thank you so much for asking that question. I did in fact do listening around various parts of the state for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any other comments from committee members? With that, House File 1065 is laid over for possible inclusion in the House Bill.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to correct you. I think you said 1065. It's 1605.
1605.
Again, that whole bipartisan thing, Mr.
No,
Chair.
I appreciate
Go on record there.
Representative Knox, 1605 be laid over for possible inclusion as amended, and we will be going to a 10-minute recess.
Thank you.